Hi everybody, welcome to this Introduction to Databases course. This video will introduce some of the key technologies that we'll be studying during the course, and it will also introduce a very useful resource called XAMPP. The scenario is some client devices, such as your smartphone or your laptop, are requesting information from a web server, for example, imdb.com server. The server gathers the requested information, pushes it into a web page, and sends the web page file back to the client device where it is displayed in a browser. Now, one question that comes to mind is, where is this information being stored? And a common answer to that question is a database. So in this course, we're going to look at how to set up a database, how to populate the database with data, how to retrieve requested data from the database, push it into a web page file, and then send that file back to a client device. In order to create a database and manipulate a database, a very common technology that's used is SQL. So in this course, we will have an introduction to SQL, which is a standard language for storing, manipulating, and retrieving data in databases. Once we've retrieved data from a database, we need to figure out how to push the data into a web page. And a very common technology that can help us do that is PHP. So we'll also have an introduction to the PHP language in this course. In fact, I've already copied some sample PHP code into my own file. This file is just on my machine. It's not a web server, it's just a normal client device. But I can do web design with HTML and CSS and JavaScript on a client device. That's not a problem. So let's just take this simple file. It's got some HTML and some PHP. There are a couple of messages, my web page, and my first PHP script. And if we run this file in a browser, hopefully we'll see those two messages. Now we do see the HTML message, but we don't see the PHP message. This code has not been processed. And let me try to explain why. PHP and SQL are known as server-side languages. And in order to execute PHP code and SQL code, we need a web server. My client device cannot execute PHP and SQL. I need a web server. Now, as a web designer, this is a problem for me because maybe I don't have a web server. So how can I design databases if I don't have a web server? What I need is a virtual server on my client machine. Okay? And to create a virtual server, we can use a fantastic resource called XAMPP. So hopefully, if you're following this course, you've already managed to download XAMPP and you're now looking at this interface. What we can do is go to the application, and it complains to me that servers are not running. Do you want to start them? Well, yes, we do, but let's just go and take a look at what servers are available. Let's go to Manage Servers. 3 servers are available. A database server. We'll come and look at this later on in the course. A file transfer protocol server. We're probably not going to be using this one, but the essential one that we definitely need is our web server. If we have a web server, we can start to design projects that include PHP and SQL. So let's start our web server. Back in the welcome page, I'm going to open the application folder. And there's lots of information here that you will probably never look at. But one folder which is extremely important is your htdocs folder. Now let me try to explain what the htdocs folder is. If I go to my own website, which is mrmusi.com. This is the domain name of my website, and it also acts as the root folder of my website. And from here, I can access other folders and files. For example, in this root folder, there is a file called hello.html. So let's open that file. Bingo! Okay? So mrmusi.com kind of acts as my root folder. That's really what htdocs is. htdocs is your root folder. And this is where you can start to create new folders and new files and anything else you want to do. Now, once we start to design files here, we want to look at them, right? In my Mr. Musi example, I typed in mrmusi.com to get to the root folder, and then I can start to find files that I want to look at. My XAMPP environment doesn't have any domain name. mrmusi.com, it isn't available here. What is the domain name of my XAMPP environment? So this is what the XAMPP people decided to do. They created a domain name called localhost. So if you type localhost into your web browser's address bar, localhost is acting as your root folder and your domain name, similar to what we looked at with mrmusi.com. And from here, we can start to look at other files and folders that are available. For example, in my root folder, I've got another folder called movies. And in my movies folder, I've got this index.php file. So let's see if we can open that file from localhost. Just go back to localhost. This is the root folder. This is really htdocs. Then I've got a folder called movies. And then I've got a file called index.php. This is a PHP file. Yes! It works! Now let's go back and have a look at this index.php file, which is in my movies folder. Just going to open it with Sublime Text. Okay, so it's very similar to the file that we looked at before. It's a PHP file because there is some PHP code inside it. So we need to use the PHP extension for these files, not .html. Okay. Now look what happens when I go back to, let's go back to XAMPP. Let's manage the server and stop it. I've stopped the server. Let's go back to my local host, movies folder, index.php, and refresh. I stopped the server. So localhost, which is my virtual server, is no longer available. So as you're working with XAMPP, you want to make sure that at least your web server is running. So let's get things set up and see if we can complete a few introduction tasks using XAMPP.